Here is my nearly finished coat, and I'm going to add some buttons and buttonholes now. Now, I have tried this on, and I really recommend that you try your coat on, obviously, like I said at the beginning, all the way through the process. But try it on and see where you want the buttons, because we have put them on this front pattern piece where traditionally buttons are. And I'm going to do this for the black trench coat exactly as per this pattern piece, but for this animal print one, velvety type feeling one, I'm going to do a little differently, and I'll explain why in a second. What you want to do for your pattern piece is there are a whole lot of buttons and buttonholes. You've got buttonhole and then button, buttonhole and button, buttonhole and button. And the idea is that you have buttonholes all the way down one side, and you have actual buttons on the piece behind so that it comes through and does up. And then that's just a button stitched on. It's not actually coming through a buttonhole. It's a faux buttonhole. It's just there for decoration to make it look in that military kind of look. This button here, which seems to be randomly on its own, is actually for where the front yoke piece goes. So if you have done the front yoke piece, you'll have that button there. If you have not done the front yoke piece, you would have another button up there which matched that buttonhole so that they went all the way down. That's what I'm going to do for the black one. How I'm going to do it is like this. This is how I'm going to mark it. I'm going to show you on this one because it's a lot easier than showing you on the black. What I want to do, hopefully you've already got your buttonholes marked on here because you did it at the beginning. If, like me, you're doing it as you go, what you need to do is line up this pattern piece with the fabric so that it accounts for the 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I want it to be lined up like this, and I'm going to pin it from the back here. Now I'm going to have to be super careful because there's going to be pins I can't see underneath. But I'm lining it up as if it's got the seam allowance still on the fabric, because I want that to be in exactly the right place. Whereas if I put the garment all the way up against here, I wouldn't be accounting for the seam allowance, and all of these placements would be 1/2 inch out. So I've got that attached, and let's say I've pinned all the way down. And then what I do is I put a pin in the edge of the buttonhole, and I'm going to mark it in the same way that we did the darts at the very beginning. So I'm going to push my pin all the way through, and then if I undo the pattern piece here, I can then get a pin in right here where I want that buttonhole to start. And I know that the buttonhole goes horizontally. If you want to, you can mark all the way along there. I just put the buttonhole across, and then where the beginning of that pin is, where it went into the fabric, so just there is where I want the buttonhole to start. So that is when I put it into my machine, that will be where I put my needle down, and then I'll stitch back and forward to my buttonhole. If you are not familiar with buttonholes, or you just don't want to do them, then use poppers, use hook and eye. There's loads of different ways. You could use snaps. There's all kinds of different fastenings you could use that are not buttons. Patterns are, I mean, we design them how we want them for the design, but then they're there for you to make it however you want to make it. So if you don't want to do actual buttons, buttonholes, just stitch your buttons on so that it looks like you've done buttons, and then do some hooks and eyes underneath. Just hand sew on some hooks and eyes or some snappers or something, and it'll look like it should, but then you don't have to do buttonholes. So I quite like buttonholes, but it's up to you. So I would mark my buttonholes all the way down like that, and then I would stitch my buttonholes down here. If you have one of these type things where it stretches out, I got this from Guthrie Garney, I think. It's a Simflex expanding sewing gauge, where when you move it, they all move in unison, so you get them perfectly, you get your buttonholes perfectly aligned. So if I was going to use this, what I would do is I would put that over my first buttonhole and then expand this down so that the next one matched the next buttonhole, and then dun dun dun, they match all of my buttonholes. Every second one matches because it's perfectly stretched out, so that I then don't have to measure and mark all of them. I can just mark the first one, put this on, and then mark the second one. And if you don't want your buttonholes in the same place as us, this is a really good tool to mark the first one where we've got it, and then mark the rest of them wherever you want them. So that's how I'm going to do it on the black coat for my buttonholes. For my matching buttons, these do not have an actual buttonhole that go with them. They are just a faux button. So this one's going to have a buttonhole on this side, but this button here, it's just going to be stitched to the fabric. So I'll put my needle through to find where it should go, and then I will stitch my button on just there like that. There'll be no buttonhole, it's just a faux holder thingy. What that means though is that your coat is going to be attached. If I fold this over, so that is going to fold over to here. So this neckline, it doesn't quite squish up at the front, but it's pretty close. It goes pretty far over. It doesn't sit like that open. It sits across like this. And the buttonholes here are on the other side. So actually this would be the other way up. Sorry, wrong way. That would be underneath, and this then goes over the top. So that's where the buttons and the buttonholes go. So you've got your faux buttonhole, your faux button. Oh my goodness, your faux button here and your actual button and buttonhole over this side, and then the buttonhole is stitched on there and the button is stitched on this side. So I'll then flip this over onto here to get my placement of my buttons, or you can do the coat, lay it flat on the ground. Once you've stitched your buttonholes, open your buttonhole and then put a pin directly in the center of the buttonhole like that, go through, and then you've got your placement on the other side where that pin is hitting. Now, do you stitch your buttons here on this end, or on that end, or in the middle? It depends on your kind of way you think about this, but what we have designed it for is for them to go in the middle, not on the end. The reason for that is then as you move, so this button stays in the same place, but the garment can move across, so the button stays in the same place, but this can move so that you just got a little bit of breathing space in your coat, and it will move and ease with you. That's what I'm going to do for the black one. I'll then undo my buttonholes, and then I'll put buttons into each of those holes and stitch them on. What I'm going to do for this one is a little bit different though. I've decided I want this to feel like a cardigan when I wear it, because it's just so cozy. I don't want buttons all the way down the front. I got my buttons and I put them on. So let me get rid of this pattern piece and show you exactly what I did. Oh, I just pulled out my marked button. Let's just pretend. I'll mark that again in a moment. That was silly, pulling out my needle, my pen I mean. So let's pretend I've marked my pin here. But anyway, I got my coat, I laid it on the ground, and then I put all of my buttons onto it. And when I looked at it, I just didn't like the look. I don't like all of these buttons against this velvety fabric. You might think it looks great. I didn't like it so much, and it's all about what you want as the person who's making it. So what I've decided to do instead is I'm going to do one like that, and then it's going to be open and it's going to be like a big cardigan. I'm so excited. And in fact, I'm going to go through my button jar and see if I can find an even bigger, like a big feature button to go here. So I might have to do a massive buttonhole. If I get a great big button, it's going to be too big to go just there, so I'm going to have to move my buttonhole in. That's fine. I'm only doing one. That's no problem. What this does mean though is that this side in here is loose, and as you're wearing it, if it's heavy and this is pulling, it will pull down and this will pivot here, and then that'll poke down and it'll be a bit uncomfortable. So because I don't have any other buttons down here to hold it in the right place, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch that on there, and then I will in here put either a little metal snapper or a little hook and eye, so I can hook that on. So that is the little tricksy thing I'm going to do with that. So I'm going to stitch those on, and then I will come and show you. So there are no other buttons or buttonholes anywhere down the coat. I have just done this one up here. I have marked that using the first buttonhole on the pattern piece, and I haven't used any of the other markings. I have stitched my buttonhole, and then what I've done is I've placed the coat how I want it done up, and this is roughly where the pattern piece says to do it, and I've placed a pin through there, and then I've used that center point of the pin to know where to stitch my button on. Then in here, what I've done is I have just hand stitched on a little, I think, is that called a hook and eye? I can never quite remember the right names for things, but it's just one I've had in my sewing box forever. I couldn't get a bigger button. That's as big as I could get, but I still think that's pretty cute. Anyway, the reason I've put that there is because there are no other buttons down here, and this is a really soft squidgy fabric. This will just slip down otherwise when I do it up, and it'll look strange. Whereas the structure of the coat, if you've got all of the other buttons on, and you've got a kind of a medium weight woven, then it should sit nicely. But I want that to do up there, so that I can just have this one button at the top and have it a bit like a cardigan. So that is that one. Now, if you've done the short length, you're going to have one less set of buttons and buttonholes than if you've done the longer length of the trench. That's totally fine, whichever one you've done. And then the last thing to talk about is which side do you want flapping over. So do you want it like that, or do you want it like that? It's completely up to you which way round it goes. Traditionally, it goes one way over the other, and that's so that ladies' maids could do up their ladies' coats. It's completely up to you whether you want left over right or right over left. It's a personal preference. The more traditional way was so that ladies' maids could do their ladies' coats up, but that is a little bit old-fashioned now, so put it whichever way you would prefer, one over the other. There are a couple of other buttons that need to go on here. If you've done the shoulder tab, then this needs to be held down flat and then a button stitched at the end, and I bring mine about a half to a quarter of an inch in and place it just centrally along that kind of center line of there, and I hold mine so that they're flat. I have seen other people do it, and I've left this one undone so that I can show you where that's it nice and flat, and then they bring it back half an inch so that when you're wearing it on your shoulder, it just pops up a little bit and it's like a little feature. I don't want that look with this, so I'm holding mine nice and flat. I'm not pulling it over, it's just nice and flat. And then I will center my button here, and when I stitch my button on, I'm not just stitching it to this, I'm stitching it all the way through to here, and I will stitch it into the seam allowance part here, not so that it goes all the way through to the underside of the coat, just so that I'm stitching it into the seam allowance. There's enough bulk there that I can do that. I will also need a button on the center back to hold down my back yoke. Now this one does have a buttonhole, so I'll show you what I did here. There's my buttonhole, we'd already stitched it. And this is what I was talking about for the front. Once you've done your buttonholes, get the pin and lay it flat so it's exactly where you want it. And then I'm going to put my pin straight through the center of the buttonhole, I mean. And then that tells me where the button will be, and that's gone straight through one of those holes because I centered my button correctly when I stitched it on. Now you'll see here, this is a 4-hole button, and I've done stitching across the 2 holes. You can do them in a square, you can do them both horizontally, both vertically, it's up to you. And then before I finished off sewing my button on, I then got my thread and I just wrapped it around in here. And what that does is creates it so that the button isn't sitting totally flat against the garment. It's got a bit of a wobble on its head, and then I stitched in a little knot and put my needle through the garment to come out here so that I couldn't see the little leftover thread like we did earlier. And what that little wobble does is means that the button sits slightly above the garment so that it sits really nicely on here. It's not pushing that heavily down in and making little wrinkles around here. It just gives it a little bit of a raised up edge. You will also need it on the other end of the a sleeve tab. If you did one, you might have done a buttonhole in there, or you might have just stitched it down like this. So it'll either be like that or like that. And I think that's all of the buttons, except for the front ones. So when I put my pattern piece down, this is that random button out to the side, is the one that's holding my front yoke on. So do all of your buttonholes first, and then come back and do the buttons afterwards too, so that they are horizontally in line. I've used the markings on the pattern piece to do my buttonholes down this front here, and then I've done it up where I want it done to. I've marked it on the pattern piece, and then I've tried it on. I actually moved the buttons underneath here over slightly because that was a little bit too tight on me. I don't know whether, maybe I've put on weight and I should have sized up, I'm not sure, but I found that just a smidge too tight, so I've actually moved that over. And this is part of pattern making that you can, and dressmaking, that you can do that if that's what works for you. So I decided I was going to do my coat up here, not over there where it should be, and then I did the same thing. I put a pin through my open buttonhole, and I knew that that's then where I needed to stitch my button onto. And once I'd done one, stitched one button on, I did it up like that, and then I actually got a pin and I pinned through there to hold it on, and then I did the same thing, put a pin through my buttonhole here, and then that's where my button went. And then once I'd stitched that button on, I did it up, and then I moved down to the next one. And the reason I kept doing them up as I moved down the garment is because I wanted to make sure that I didn't accidentally make a bubble of fabric as I was doing it. So that would be the fabric laid flat, but then you can misalign them and have like a bubble. I mean, that's exaggerated, but I wanted it to sit really nice and flat. So if I just put a pin in the middle, then I know that when I do that pin there and I lift this up, that it's going to be exactly in the right place. So I did all my buttons down the front, and then, and I'll show you this zoomed out in a moment on a mannequin, I then stitched the buttons on the other side. Now, because I moved my buttons over slightly, the alignment of where it should be directly underneath here was then too wide, and it just was all squidged over to the side. So I've also moved the alignment of my my row of buttons down here. You can either use the markings on the pattern piece for your buttons to get them exactly where you want them. No, it's not to get them exactly where you want them, to get them as per the design, or you can do like I did, try it on, check whether you like it. If it's slightly too tight, undo it a little bit. If it's too big and you want it moved over, but then move it over. It's completely up to you. And then line up the other side either with the markings on the pattern piece, or what you're looking for is that these are horizontal. So I actually got a ruler and made a marking like that all the way down, so that I could get this one, I could get all my buttons, and so they looked nice and military level. So there we go, I've got my buttons on all my other little bits and pieces as well. There we go, doesn't that look cool? Love it. So we are done and dusted with this. I'll show you them on a mannequin, and then please post yours. I want to see what you made. We are now finished, yay! Well done, so like just, oh my goodness, such a huge well done. If you have been following us the whole way through and you have made a trench coat, or you are at least part way through making a trench coat, that is absolutely amazing. This has been such an epic sew along. I feel so privileged and honoured to have done the whole thing with you, and I really hope you've enjoyed it. I want to show you the final coats. I know you saw a sneak peek of them at the beginning of the sew along, but I want to actually show you them. So this is my leopard print one. As you know, it's pretty bog standard. It's got the patch pockets, and it's got, but I have made a few adjustments. I've done the single button with the little hook and eye there, and I haven't done the sleeve tabs. I've kept them straight, and then if we turn it around, it's got a plain back. There's no what's it called, yoke on the front or on the back. And then show you my black one. I love this. Oh, this has so been worth all of the effort. My fingers are so sore from sewing on all of the buttons. I really hope your fingers are not as sore as mine and that you've used a thimble. My nails are too long, I can't use a thimble. Anyway, this is the all of the bells and whistles option, as you know, and I've done horizontal stitching on the collar. I've put a faux leather on the bottom of the collar instead, and then as you can see on the back, there is the back yoke. I've done the belt. It's got the traditional what's it called? Back back vent. And I've got all of the bells. I've got the tabs, I've got the front yokes, I've got all of the buttons down the front. There's a hanging loop inside, so I am so pleased with these. I love them. Thank you so much for following along with me, and please post pictures, whether you're finished or whether you're still part way through it. Post, let us see how you're going. If you're following us on our Facebook RP Sew Along, if you're following us on our Facebook RP Sew Alongs, it's just called RP Sew Alongs on Facebook. If you're following us on that group, post in the group, show us what you've been making. If you're following us on YouTube, then comment in the comments below and show us what you've been making, whether you're finished, whether you're partway there. Let us know how you're getting on. I cannot wait to see what you've been making. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. I've so enjoyed this, and I can't wait for our next one. Thank you so much.